Before 7 on this Monday morning, good to have you with us. Yesterday, Oscar Mabuyane was elected chair of the ANC in the Eastern Cape at the party's highly fractious and violent provincial elective conference at the East London City Hall. The former secretary got 931 votes as opposed to 7 votes for outgoing chair Phumulo Masualle. The conference has been characterised by violence, with a disruption on Friday evening, stun grenades being fired last night outside the venue, and a fight between delegates that left several people injured. Now, an urgent court application filed by a group of delegates supporting Masualle who are challenging the outcome of the vote was heard. The group alleges that there were bogus delegates who went and voted. Well, to talk more about what happened at the ANC Eastern Cape Conference and what it means for the ANC elective conference in December, we're joined in studio by Professor Booysen. Good to have you. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. Well, it certainly seems that the road leading up to this ANC elective conference in December has been marred by court cases, challenges, allegations of bogus branch delegates. Is the ANC national leadership losing control of these branches?
You know, it is very evident that they are not entirely in control. They plead unity, they plead peace, and exactly the opposite happens at some of these conferences. Granted, not all of them, but certainly at very important province level and at very important regional meetings of the ANC, regional executive committee meetings of the ANC. And there is so much turmoil that is happening around that. And there is that we get serious questions about now, perhaps legality, that can be proven in many cases, like we saw in the Eastern Cape over the weekend as well, legally a quorum, but then were those meetings legitimate?
Yeah.
And that is where today's judgment in the Kauai Court, Eastern Cape, will be so important, because it will give pointers to that delicate balance between legality, quorums, yes, but how was that quorum obtained? What were the conditions in which that level of internal party democracy was being exercised? Because we know in 2012, at that benchmark Constitutional Court judgment, right at the time of the Mangaung National Elective Conference, now 5 years ago, there the Constitutional Court was adamant about the importance of intra-party democracy for the eventual casting of the national vote, for people having a right to exercise their constitutional right at that level. The two go hand in hand, and that is also why it's so important what we see unfolding now. Because in a way too, because the ANC is remaining the dominant party, even if there are problems, whether it have outright majorities, etc., but it is the dominant and the biggest party. What happens inside the ANC really determines our national level democracy.
Yeah, I mean, we see there's chaos happening in KwaZulu-Natal. There's chaos happening within the Northwest. Now we're seeing the chaos in the Eastern Cape, although they're saying that the results are in. But we've got a court ruling this morning that is exceptionally important, as you have referred to. You know, this ANC conference in December, this is really looking worrisome. If we saw the behaviour that we saw happening last night, this division is very, very evident within the ANC.
The divisions are tangible, they are harsh. It is as if people are fighting, in their own words, for their last turn to drink from this trough, quote-unquote, of benefits and personal enrichment, etc., as if they're fighting now as if there will not be a second chance.
Yeah.
And so we have to see these very vehement fights in the context, too, of a declining organization, and we see as was tangible in the organizational report in the Eastern Cape of the weekend too, that the membership is dwindling in that province. And that is certainly the case across most provinces. The ANC has been very coy, not releasing membership figures as they had done on previous occasions, previous run-ups to the national conferences. But we know the organization is in decline, and the fighting gets so much fiercer when that organization is in decline. And many people in the organization too are saying, as it is evident that a tide is turning, or at least parts of the tide is turning, against the current dominant faction in the ANC, their fights are getting more violent, more contested.
Well, indeed, the fights that we're seeing within these conferences and within these confined spaces, but once they leave the confined spaces, as we're seeing in KwaZulu-Natal, is the issue of assassinations and killings.
Exactly. That is so important. Inside conferences, it's still relatively, excuseless, but relatively harmless in terms of plastic chairs being thrown around. But out of those venues, once it gets into government and governance, then we've seen assassinations, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, so many death threats being thrown around. So it is not an organization at peace with itself, and unfortunately that spills over into society.
Yeah. Let's look at the Eastern Cape and go back there. So we see Oscar Mabuyane is now being elected as the chair of the ANC in the Eastern Cape. We also know that he is a big supporter of Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa. Is this a big boost in the Eastern Cape now, obviously, for the Ramaphosa faction?
Well, it could be, but this type of a boost is really no big boost for anybody, because the Eastern Cape is also, there are very many contradictory reports as to which faction supports exactly which candidate, etc. And that is really a chaotic, pandemonious situation in the Eastern Cape. And that is certainly not the way to instill confidence in an organization's ability to govern a country.
I mean, the results that came through, I mean, if you look at the numbers, was it 931 against 7 for Masualle? I mean, now obviously his supporters are challenging this and saying, Masualle saying, I mean, there's no way that this could possibly be the official result. But again, as you say, it's there. Those were the results.
But that result also shows that we know from reports. Apparently, there were about 1,700 delegates that were supposed to be there.
Okay.
And at a stage, there were something like 2,500. And there was a big issue over the weekend as to who gains access to the venue and whether once a few branches and delegates were ruled to be illegitimate and were cut out from voting processes. But then they apparently didn't return their accreditation cards. So many issues there. Bottom line is there were about 1,700 delegates who were supposed to have voted. And that means we're looking at about 700 to 800 missing delegates.
Yeah, missing votes, missing delegates,
there. And so it really seems as if those chairs excised a whole faction out of that venue.
I also want to, very quickly, before we run out of time, touch on what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal, because the ANC's top leadership says it will make the final decision on whether the party's KwaZulu-Natal leadership should go ahead with the appeal against that High Court ruling.
Yes.
What do you think is going to happen there?
You know, that is even more contested, probably at many levels, than the Eastern Cape. We know there have been contradictory reports about the National Executive Committee meeting of the ANC last week, that legal opinion was sought, and there are reports that the President himself then came with an additional legal opinion. That several newspapers yesterday reported on that, and that directly apparently challenged the NEC's position, challenged the Thuli House. There are contradictory reports, the story of the ANC at the stage, contradictory reports, until we get, hopefully, a clarificatory statement by the NEC today as to whether the NEC will have the authority. Its indications are they will have the authority to decide, yes, it will be appealed, but simultaneously there is a very contested space, and the province, a very, very powerful province, is directly challenging the NEC. In that case, the case of KwaZulu-Natal, the factions are very clearly delineated, and it is a specific case there of the pro-Zuma faction hoping to get the right to appeal, and then if they get the right to appeal, that faction will remain there. If not, and that is what the NEC is pleading for as well, a more unitary approach, that the different factions come together and talk to each other. But talking to one another, each other, is not, in many cases, it's just no longer possible, where the animosities and divisions run very, very deep.
All right, Prof, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much for talking to us here on the program. But just a question off air to the Professor was talking about the run-up in 2012 to the elective conference compared to this. You cannot even compare it. This is fire.
Cutthroat, excuse the pun.
And we'll leave it at that.
That's wrong.
Yeah, it unfortunately is. But Professor, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Susan Booysen talking to us about the elective conference in the Eastern Cape, what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal and other issues leading up to December in the ANC selecting new leadership. All right, let's take a break.